Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of FinTechTainment. We are FinTech Club and I am 𝐅𝐢𝐧𝐓𝐞𝐜𝐡𝐓𝐵 I am the host of this episode. For those of you who are new, FinTechTainment is a podcast-based project at RMIT FinTech Club, where we aim to interview some of the brightest minds in the industry, where our guests get to share their insights, perspectives, and personal stories. On this second episode, I'm interviewing Mr. Phillip An, who is the co-founder and COO of Homebase. Prior to starting Homebase, Phillip lived mostly in the United States, having enrolled in Caltech for an undergraduate program and Harvard for an MBA program. He then ventured into many different careers at big businesses whose brands you'd probably recognize, such as McKinsey and Goldman Sachs. Afterwards, he traveled back to Southeast Asia and, along with his co-founders, started Homebase, based on a problem in the home market that they observed. What I'm truly interested to understand from Phillip's perspective today is his adventurous and ambitious entrepreneurship journey and his rise to success. And I hope that this episode will be insightful and engaging for all of you. So, without further ado, welcome. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much for the lovely introduction.
So, you've heard me introduce about you, but I guess that the audience here would love to hear about your perspective on yourself. So could you briefly introduce, talk about yourself and perhaps introduce some of the points that I have not covered previously?
Yeah, I think you did an amazing job introducing me. I think you covered most of the points. So as you mentioned, for the past few years, I've been the co-founder and chief operating officer of this company in Vietnam called Homebase. And we have this mission of really trying to help everyone access home ownership and making that process available to everyone, basically. And prior to that, I had a few years of experience across various industries, including professional services, finance, and technology industries. And yeah, as you mentioned, I grew up all over the world, in China, in US, in Singapore as well, and before coming to Vietnam. So happy to dive into any one of those points.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So can you briefly talk about your company, Homebase? And perhaps briefly talk about the PropTech industry in Vietnam in general. Like, what do you think is its potential for growth in the Vietnamese economy?
Yeah, well, I think for PropTech as a whole, I think it's one of those industries that is really exciting. And there's so many opportunities to start businesses or operate businesses in there. Partially because, when you look at PropTech as a whole, like in the US and in more established markets, I would say that there's waves of different business models that have emerged. And in the first wave, you have a lot of these like listing platforms, which have really emerged in Vietnam. And I think as the economy develops more and more, there's a lot of opportunity for people to do businesses across other types of various business models, right? Including in real estate investing and finance, maybe using AI or using other technologies to make real estate and the process easier as well. And I think Vietnam is a really unique market as well because like China, I think it's around like 75% of household wealth is concentrated in real estate as an asset class. So it's obviously something that is deeply significant, right, for a lot of young people. And I think from a cultural perspective as well, right, a lot of people want to buy real estate and own a home, right? And maybe this is not so true in more developed markets like Europe or the US or those kind of things, but in Vietnam, it's certainly true. So, because it's such an important decision, it's such an important thing, I think, there's a lot of opportunities to do so, right? And in regards to Homebase, we started with this really simple problem which was, we talked to a lot of people and especially a lot of young people and people who have more alternative career paths these days, including entrepreneurs or people who have freelance careers and those kind of things. And we talked to them, hey, like, what's your biggest pain point, right, that you face in regards to owning a home? And, initially we thought it was like, people want to invest, but they couldn't invest. But it was actually this pure aspect of, getting access to financing. So, once we kind of started exploring this problem and diving deeper into the customer need, we realized that a lot of people actually still want to buy a home, but they just could not access financing because of very traditional credit scoring or because of the traditional kind of banking industry. So what we did was we aimed to find an alternative way to help these people be able to own a home. And the way that we do so is we work with customers, we identify their need, whatever property they want to buy, we buy it first for them, and then we basically will structure a financing plan by which they can slowly buy back the property over time. And it's a more flexible, more affordable, and kind of a better way for them to be able to own a home over time.
Now, you've had some of the most interesting backgrounds that I have heard or read about. So it's said that you were born in Mongolia, you lived briefly in South Africa and in the United States. You lived shortly in Singapore before you came back to Vietnam. So what was that multicultural experience like, and why did you ultimately choose to come back to Vietnam?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think getting to live abroad in many different countries and many different cultures is, I think it's a blessing and a curse, right?
And why is that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. So partially why is because, I mean, on the con side, actually, a lot of people tell me like these days I'm like very extroverted. I like talking to people and those kind of things. But I think when I was younger, I was actually quite shy. And partially is because, imagine, you're a kid and you're growing up in elementary school or middle school where, forming a lot of friendships really matters, right? But then you're moving like schools or moving like countries, right? Every 3 or 4 years. So it's hard to find like very long-term relationships, very long-term friendships. So, if you're a kid and you just really want to fit in, it's a bit hard to do that, right? So I think that's why in the beginning I was actually quite shy, and I had to really develop a better sense of like, self-confidence and getting to know, introducing myself to a lot of people and navigating between all of these environments, right? But so I think that's kind of why it's like a curse. But, on the blessing part is, once you get used to that, right? Going to any new environment or meeting new people, it's almost fun, right? And you start to enjoy that kind of experience as well. So that's kind of my perspective on that. Yeah.
Do you experience culture shocks every now and often when you like moved from different countries?
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, definitely.
And how was that experience like, though?
Yeah, I mean, like, and I'm sure like even for you and a lot of, the people at the FinTech Club, like you maybe also feel something a little bit similar in the sense that, like RMIT, for example, as a school is a Western institution from Australia, right? So maybe the way that they teach you guys is more like Socratic as a method. And that's often true of a lot of international schools or schools, let's say in America or the West or those kind of things. But maybe more traditional Vietnamese or Asian culture tends to teach you other traits, right? So you have to kind of draw a fine line or a balance between, yourself maybe at home or with the values that your parents instill in you versus what your school teaches you or the business environment overseas and those kind of things. And so, but I think if you're able to kind of navigate both successfully and, for example, for you guys, right? You guys also get this good blend of both things. Like, I think it's actually a really great blessing because you can be more flexible and navigate both environments as well. Yeah.
So now I want to briefly talk about your various high-level experiences before jumping into your journey with Homebase. So I think, as I've mentioned before, I read your profile, and it says that you've worked at both McKinsey, you worked at the investment bank firm Goldman Sachs, one of the largest financial institutions in the world. And also you attended an MBA program at Harvard. So these are all very high-level experiences. So how did you think those experiences, I mean, first of all, can you talk about those experiences? And also, can you relate to how those experiences helped you later on when you eventually did your startup?
Yeah, so I think, growing up for me, like I definitely had a lot of role models, right? And especially like people in the years above you or when you're young, especially, my parents would say, oh, look at who's and whose kid, right? Like he's at this company or this, this MBA program at Harvard or Stanford and, you're being compared, right? So I think when you grow up, you have almost this like expectation from your parents or the people around you to achieve a certain thing, right? And these are defined milestones. But, and I think when people go through a traditional education system, it's always about that next milestone, right? So, I'm sure for you guys as well, like after you graduate middle school, it's like, which high school in Vietnam should you go to, right? And then after high school, like obviously RMIT is one of the best schools in Vietnam, but then maybe after RMIT, maybe you guys are a little bit pressured to find whatever that next prestigious job is, right? And after the job, it's like, what's the MBA program and what's next? And, you're always constantly climbing this career path. And, I found that when I was young, obviously I was also instilled with this kind of like expectation that you should always be the best, right? And that started from school, from academics, right? Where it's like, okay, like I should always like find whatever the best school is and, and go from there. But also then like the next internship, the next job. So, when I was considering, what should I do, right? It was very easy to, I guess, inherit a lot of these values and a lot of these like, okay, I should go to this company or I should do this role because this is what all of the really brilliant, really incredible people in, kind of in the years above me always do, right? So that was kind of the inspiration for that, right? And so I think even in university, when I was like, I want to try investment banking or I want to, or I don't even know what I want to do, but like people said, okay, maybe management consulting is something that could be good for you to try, right? Like obviously they said, okay, then you should, do consulting. And then if you do consulting, which firm should you go to? Like McKinsey, the best one, right? So you should try to interview for McKinsey and those kind of things, right? But, to be very, very honest with myself, like when I was very young, like I also didn't know really what I wanted to do exactly, right? Like I think it's very rare that you're like 8 years old and you're like, I want to be like a management consultant. Like no one says that, right? No one's like, yeah, I want to.
So life just takes you into different paths.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of this like professional services, especially at McKinsey or Goldman, is they pitch you with a very good value proposition, which is you can come here, you work very, very hard, but you build a lot of these foundational skill sets. You work with very incredible people and you have a lot of options, right? At the very end of 2 years or 4 years or 6 years or whatever it is, like, you can do anything. You can go to any program, you can take any job, right? So for a lot of very high achieving people who graduate from very good schools, like this is a really good path, right? To be able to extend your optionality. And, for me, I felt very similar at that point, right? To be frank, however, I think even before I kind of, started working at Goldman or doing investment banking, I had some friends who told me, if you do it, you're going to hate it. Like, this is not suited for you, right? And it's not anything that's wrong with that fundamental opportunity. But, a lot of these friends or mentors, they already knew who I was as a person, right? I'm the type of person where I'm quite entrepreneurial, right? I like doing things my way, right? I like finding new ideas, right? I don't really like working in environments that's like so structured or so bureaucratic where your boss is like, you have to do this just because, right? I don't like things that are like, you're just doing things because of, you want to look good for your boss, right? So in investment banking or more traditional cultures, sometimes you're just staying at the company until like 10 p.m. or 1 a.m. because your boss is there. And why? Because you want to look good, right? And I'm like, this is not like, why did someone do that, right? And on the more like, kind of longer phase, like I didn't really believe in the sense of like, delayed gratification, right? Where I think a lot of people, when they start their careers or even, in other parts of life, right? Like relationships or whatever, they have this mindset of, I'm going to do this for a few years and just like bear with it, right? And I'm just going to suffer through it, even if I don't like it, right? And at the end of it, I'll be happy because I will earn more money or I will have this title, I have this status. And I just didn't really believe in this attitude because, your life is very short. You never know, maybe you'll be run over by a truck in like 5-6 years, right? And you never know. And in the meantime, you just sacrificed your happiness in your life to do this thing. So that was already my attitude. My friends already said, you're not going to like this. And I said, you're wrong. I'm going to like it. I'm going to do it anyway.
And eventually, did you like it?
And then I was like, oh man, like my friends were right. Like I was completely wrong. But for me, it was also like a good experience because obviously it showed me that, okay, I should be more authentic to who I am and I should pursue the things that, I already know that, I kind of do. And, before a lot of it was just like, okay, these jobs or these companies or these roles, like it was like very high status, right? Like you tell people you're a banker or investment banker at Goldman Sachs, or you tell people you're a management consultant at McKinsey, and people are like, oh my gosh, you're like the next coming of Jesus, Like it's great. But then, like when you talk to a lot of the people actually at Goldman or McKinsey, right? They're like, oh man, I want to leave. And if only I could leave Goldman and I could go to Blackstone for private equity and I can make $1 million next year, like then I'll be happy. And then you're like, okay, like everyone on the inside wants to go out and everyone on the outside wants to go in, right? So you have this like very interesting dichotomy as well. So sorry, I'm just rambling, but that was the initial kind of attitude towards like, I just want to try these. I thought, these would be really good. I thought these would be really cool. But in the very end, I realized that, relative to who I am and what I like doing, it was not a good match for my skill set, right? but it's not saying that these are bad jobs, right? It's not, I mean, these are great opportunities. You know, you meet some of the most brilliant, most hardworking people who will change the world, who will become future CEOs. Like, you meet incredible people at these companies. But, you know, for some people it's a good fit. For me, maybe not, right? But like, even today, like, you know, if I start a business or if I try to raise capital from venture capital investors and you tell people, oh, I'm an alumnus of this organization at McKinsey or at Goldman, right? People treat you with a different air of respect because they know how rigorous it is to get into these institutions and they know how rigorous the training is, right? In terms of what it teaches you, the soft skills, the hard skills that they instill in you. So I think there's still a certain amount of value that you can instill, but it really depends on, you know, for yourself, like, what do you want to do in the future in the long run? And do these fundamental things make it worth it, right? And does that align on that path, right? So that's what I would think about. Yeah.
So I think you described a reputational benefit of working for these giant institutions, these reputable institutions that would help you later on when you're, let's say, doing fundraising, raising Series A, Series B, et cetera, et cetera. But I wanted to get to know, like, how does it change you from a skill set standpoint? Like, how does working at McKinsey and because I'm sure that a lot of people at FinTech Club and a lot of people in RMIT, they want to go into MEBs, right? You know, McKinsey, Boston, and Bain. And they also wanted to go into like large finance, maybe not Goldman Sachs, but something of the equivalent, like, you know, Dragon Capital or, you know, SSI, like these large financial institutions. So what did you think were like the skill sets or how it changed you from, let's say, from like on a skill level, right? How does it change you so that you can apply those skills, transferable skills, onto your startup later on? Like, how did it change you from that perspective?
No, that's a good question. I think there's like, I would say that there's like two classes of skills that you learn. There's obviously like the very job specific skills, right? So for example, if you're doing something that's a very financial role, right? Like investment banking or private equity or, you know, any kind of investing, you learn a lot of, you know, financially modeling, like accounting and, you know, how to read a DCF, how to build a model, like all of these things, right? And these are very specific to the job. So, you know, if you want to continue that career path, or for example, if you end up, you know, let's say operating your own business, a lot of them are helpful, right? Because you need to know how to read a financial statement, or if you raise capital from investors, you need to know how to read a term sheet, right? Or structure a contract, right? So these are very specific technical skills that may help you later on, right? But it really depends on your path. I think the more important skill sets that you learn in a lot of these entry-level professional services are, number one is just like soft skills, right? So, you know, especially in a consulting role, if you're client facing, you learn how to interact with clients, right? And oftentimes your clients are people who are like, let's say CEOs of these really big companies, right? Who have so much experience. And for you as a very junior analyst to be able to manage that client relationship or to describe to them what's wrong, right? And you know, sometimes like you face a lot of criticism for these MBB kind of jobs because you're like a 22-year-old, you have 1 year of experience and you're telling this like, you know, CEO who has like 35 years of experience what he should do with his business, right? And he's like, are you sure you know what you're talking about, right? So it's like, you know, but it's up to you then to convince him, right? And you know, persuade him, like, how can you actually add value and, you know, kind of persuade him that like, this is the insight that you're missing in the business, or this is the innovative idea that you're considering, right? And I think that skill of like, fundamentally it's like persuasion, right? Or like presentation skills, right? Like, I think those are be helpful, obviously not even just for business, right? Or not even career, just like, if you want to be in a relationship or if you want to find friends, right? Like, it's good for like social skills and interaction and those kind of things as well. Yeah. So I would say those are very helpful. Yeah.
Right. So can you talk a little bit about your time at Harvard? Now, before I go into that, so did you immediately pursue the MBA program at Harvard immediately after Caltech? Or was it like you worked for some companies and then you pursued MBA at Harvard?
Yeah. So I was very fortunate because I was admitted to this special program that HBS had. And now Stanford and HBS and MIT, Wharton, a lot of these top programs have it, where basically I was admitted to Harvard directly after undergraduate, actually the year I was graduating. And they basically already gave me an offer and they allowed me to go work and do whatever I want for anywhere between like from 2 years on and beyond. So the program, if you are curious, is called 2+2, with the intention that this will allow you to have almost like a safety net. So you can go, start a business, you can go travel, you can do all these things, right? But you always have this opportunity to come back and do your MBA at HBS as kind of the worst case scenario. So it's a bit of a specialized program. So I was admitted to that program, and because of that, I ended up, working and doing other things before going back to Harvard Business School. Yeah.
And so I'm sure that a lot of curious students would like to know is how hard was the experience at Harvard? How hard was it to pursue an MBA Harvard?
Yeah, I mean, I think people say like the hardest part of an MBA is getting in.
And why is that?
Why is it? I mean, the day-to-day part of MBA, I would say, the core experience and the core value that you get from MBA is not necessarily like academics, right? So now you guys are an undergraduate. So a lot of it is like classes that are quite foundational to your academic experience in regards to like, I want to learn how to do like this specific skill, and this is very applicable for your job, right? But if you look at an MBA program, a lot of people already have many years of work experience, right? A lot of people already kind of have a career, and they're just taking a break to either form like industry connections or do networking, or some people are switching careers. But a lot of the experience is actually, I would say, the social component, right? Or, if you're taking classes, a lot of it is more like classes that you're very interested in, right? So, for example, at HBS, there's a class called happiness, right? So you learn about how to be happy. Or there's another class called what was it called? Anyway, like there's one class about like negotiation, for example, right? Where basically every single week, all you do is just negotiate with other people. So it's not like a hard academic skill, but it's more practical, and it's quite fun actually, right? And then actually, like at Stanford, I have some friends at Stanford. They have a class of like touchy-feely, which is more like it's like therapy, right? So they do this, like for example, I heard that they do this one exercise where you're in a room with like 5 or 6 other people, and then you rank everyone from who you like the most to who you like the least in front of them, and then you guys have to just openly have a conversation about it. So like in that point, it's not like you're not technically learning like an academic subject, but it's more around like
soft skills,
right? And who you are, and fundamentally discovering like who you are as a person, and building that inner self-confidence, right? So I think those are some of the like interesting classes, right? And then obviously for MBA, a lot of it is just like travel, right? Like people are going to, like I have a friend who traveled to 30 countries in 1 year during MBA, right? For fun, right? So, like, is that hard? I don't know, right? I don't think so, right? But, obviously, like, maybe there's other, like, more academic classes, like, that you can take for sure. But I will say it really depends on what your goal is, right? If you want to do the program, like, what do you want to get out of the program, and those kind of things. So it's slightly different for everyone. Yeah.
So you mentioned the most significant benefit of the Harvard MBA program then is connections.
Yeah.
And I think that connections and kind of the people that you meet either can be your potential business partners or could be people who inspire you. So did you happen to meet people who inspire you while you were in Harvard? And did you meet anyone who was like your mentors, or like who inspired you while you were in Harvard, or who inspired you in general?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think the good thing about going to these institutions is that they say at least for an MBA program, or even for any master's program, that it's very hard that in any other period of your life that you'll meet a group of people that are so ambitious, talented, and going to be so successful and well off, right? And I think that's very true. And like in my class, like in my the place I was living, there was a guy who was like, he played for the NBA. He's like really tall, right? He's like 7 foot tall, basically. There's a few like Olympians, like one girl won a gold medal. There's a few people who, bought and sold businesses. There's a few people who, maybe they came from family businesses, but that they were very, very big and very successful as well. So a lot of your peers are very interesting, and some people come from also very humble backgrounds as well, right? I had a peer who he came from like Syria actually, and obviously the past several years, like the situation in Syria is not very good because there's a lot of like conflict there in the country, and he had to basically flee the country, and his family is still there as well, right? So you hear a lot of these very inspiring journeys and those kind of things. And of course, your professors, like some professors are very experienced, right? They, some professors are worth billions of dollars, right? They're billionaires themselves, and they've been massively successful in businesses, or they've sold or invested in very big businesses, and now they just are teaching because they love teaching, right? And those kind of things. So I think definitely on the people part, it's quite inspiring when you see how diverse everyone is and how many ways that people have achieved success and what their unique paths are. So that's really good, right? I would say though, like for me, I think the biggest learning is it is very interesting actually, because in one of the classes, I forgot which one, like they gave us this like study, which is this survey, right? So they did the survey with like the Harvard Business School class of 1963. So that means that they are like, that was already like 60 something years ago, 60, 70 years ago, right? And when they did HBS, that means that they were like already 20 something, right? So maybe these people are around like 90 years old, right? And what they did is they basically kept up with this class during like reunions. So every after 5 years after they graduated, 10 years, 15 years, 25 years, 50 years, right? And they tracked the advice that these people gave, right? Like this entire class that they gave in every single reunion. And they asked them about I think it's 13 or 14 different subjects, right? About happiness, about family, about wealth, about love, about family, about, business, all of this thing, right? And they tracked all of this advice. And obviously they tracked it as people progress through the years, right? And I think the most interesting takeaway from that, and I think there's actually a website where you can see this reading, but the most interesting takeaway I got from that is that honestly, at the end of the day, even when, it's the Harvard Business School class of this, and these people are massively successful and wealthy. And I think it was it was 1/3 of them have $50 million US dollars or more in net wealth or something like that, right? Despite that, the most common theme of what drove their happiness was not the amount of money that they had or business success. It's the small things in life. It's about your family or your kids, or is it about, did you find something that's meaningful in your career? And in fact, the opposite was also true, where there was many, many people who achieved a lot of wealth and a lot of money, but yet their lives were very unsatisfying. And they felt like suffering through many years of doing something they did not like at the very end was not worth it. Right? So I found that very inspiring because, if you're a young person, right? Even, in your shoes or even my shoes today, right? You're always oh, I want to achieve this thing, or I want to make this much money, or I want my business to be so successful. But what you learn is if you're not enjoying what you do, even if you achieve the results at the very end, right? When you're 80 or 90 years old, when you're on your deathbed, or when maybe you don't have a family who's loves you, or whatever it is, right? Maybe it's not worth it at the very end, right? And these people have shown that basically through the years, right? So for me, that was actually a very poignant, a very emotional takeaway from that as well. And it's a good reminder that I think regardless of what you pursue, even when you're young, right? At least you should kind of make it feel like it actually resonates with you, that you're actually passionate about this, that you feel like you're providing very unique value in doing this, not just you're doing this for money or you're doing this for status or something else.
So to kind of summarize that, you have met a lot of inspiring people, and you've been very inspired by either by their successes in various competencies, and as well as their humble backgrounds, they were here from Syria, right? But I think the most interesting and the most inspiring thing that you encountered during that time is you realize over time that people's happiness depends not just on material things, but also on the very tiny things. That's what inspires you the most, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. I don't think it's that people's happiness doesn't depend on material things, because that's obviously unfair, right? There's a lot of people who are in situations where they can't really provide food on the table, and to say to them that money is not important. Like that's stupid, right? Like, but I think for a lot of young people who have the opportunities, like, for example, you guys are MIT, it's a really good school. You probably have a lot of job opportunities as well. You have a lot of career opportunities. Maybe your families are very supportive, right? I would say that at that point, to over-optimize for financial success may not contribute to long-term happiness, right? As opposed to finding something that you feel is more meaningful and that you feel like is contributing to the world, or whatever form that may take, right? And so that's something that I would try to think about when you make career decisions and how you want to lead your life.
Speaking of career decisions, I want to talk about one of your career decisions. One of the, I would say that not a lot of people are willing to take, which is the path of entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
Now, so it kind of segues to my next question, which is, but I'd like to phrase it as something like this. Before that, I want to ask, what was the job you were doing before starting Homebase?
Yeah, so I was actually working at that time in San Francisco. I was at LinkedIn, actually.
You were working for LinkedIn.
Yeah, working in technology, yeah.
I see. So I don't know what the median pay of LinkedIn is, but I'm pretty sure that it's one of the Silicon startups, Silicon Valley startups. And I'm sure that the salary is actually quite high. And I'm just curious from the perspective of entrepreneurship, which is, why did you forego that opportunity to work at LinkedIn to pursue something a lot more risky? And it doesn't provide you with, let's say, income certainty, right? Why did you start to pursue the entrepreneurship path of starting Homebase?
Well, I think everyone has different goals, right? So I guess, for me, I felt very fortunate in some sense, whereby I had, a few years of job experience working at various companies, right? Across professional services, across technology. At the same time, for me, I was fortunate to be already admitted to the Harvard Business School program. So I felt like, I could rely on that. And I think in my mind, I always wanted to start a business at some point. I always felt like I would eventually do entrepreneurship. But I thought I would be doing it when I'm like 30 or 40, when I actually knew what I was doing, right? Or I had more work experience. But I think after a few years, after, kind of working, and I was considering, hey, like, if I decided to just do this immediately, right? And instead of waiting a few years, like, what's the worst thing that can happen, right? The worst thing is that you just fail and maybe you just find another job, or, you go back to a big tech company, or you go back to professional services. And maybe you progress more slowly on the career ladder, right? But, it's not so bad, right? If that's the worst case scenario. So for me, it was always this question of like, okay, if not now, then it's when, right? And I think when you're younger, you have this hunger and you have this maybe naivety, right? You think that, oh, I can do anything, right? Or I can conquer the world. And, maybe when you're older and if you have a family, I don't know, are you married yet? No, right? You're not married yet, you don't have kids. So you don't have like as much financial responsibility, right? And you don't feel like, hey, if I quit my job and I do a startup and it fails, then how am I going to feed my kids? Or, oh my gosh, RMIT is so expensive. My kid's going to drop out of RMIT. Like what's going to happen, right? So you don't have that responsibility yet. And I think in some sense, I felt that, okay, if I have this privilege to be able to do so, I should take that advantage. And so, so that's kind of what I did. Yeah.
And I'm curious, at what age did you decide to transition into entrepreneurship? Founding Homebase.
I think it was like 24.
Oh, really? That early?
Yeah, 24, 25, something like that. Yeah.
I'm curious about what the early stages of building Homebase was like. So how did you, first of all, how did you come to the problem statement of your business? Like, okay, like this is the market, this is the problem, this is the gap of the market that I wanted to fill. Yeah. And how did you assemble a team? How did you, let's say, raise capital? How did you, launch a product to the market? How did you know that the market was going to take it? Like was going to be optimistic about the solution that you're providing? So can you walk me through like those stages of building your startup?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So I think for us in the very beginning, like we didn't actually immediately settle on this as a solution or this as a market even, right? Initially we were looking at this like interesting idea, which is more around like investing actually. So what we observed is fundamentally like there's a lot of asset classes, like alternative asset classes that can outperform traditional investments, right? So your traditional investments are like real estate, stock, those kind of things. But if you have a lot of money, right, you can actually buy like a Picasso painting or like a Monet painting, right? Or you can buy a 1950 Ferrari, or you can buy some very rare cigars or very rare whiskey. And if you look at some of these asset classes on a performance basis, some of them outperform even the stock market. But what we thought was, hey, it's obviously very unfair because maybe not everyone has like $20 million to buy a Picasso, right? So what happens to everyone else is that maybe they're just left out of this investing thing. So our initial idea was more around what happens if we could help buy one of these like rare assets or these alternative assets, and then we would fractionalize them, right? So instead of buying the Picasso yourself, we would break it up into like 10,000 different pieces, right? So you can own a piece of the Picasso and your friend can, and your mom can as well, right? And then over time, it's almost like a company. It's like a stock, right? And it can trade up and trade down. Right. But you have equity in this rare painting, and you can actually earn on the underlying appreciation, right? So we started with that idea, and it was quite interesting. And we were initially in Singapore, so we were testing this, and some people were very, very interested. And eventually, what that led us to was people were suggesting, "Hey, can you actually do this for real estate, right?" Because a lot of people want to buy real estate, especially in Singapore, and property prices are very expensive. And so we were testing that as well. And, one thing led to another. So we were then focused on real estate. And then after kind of we settled on real estate, we started then talking to more and more consumers, right? Because part of the startup journey in the beginning is like, you don't really know if this is a good problem to solve, or you don't know if people actually truly want it, or if it's just like a cool idea. So we were talking to more and more and more and more. And I think really we're driven by this like concept of, if you want to start a company, you want to determine if your idea is what they call a painkiller or a vitamin, right? A vitamin is like, oh, cool, it's a vitamin. It's good to have, right? I take it. It's good for me. Cool, right? A painkiller is like, oh my God, like my stomach really hurts. I need a painkiller, right?
Yes.
And I take it and I'm like, oh yes, thank God, right? I have no more pain, right? So you want to find in a startup the problems that are more like a painkiller instead of a vitamin. And we were thinking maybe the investing in real estate thing is more like, it's like a cool thing, right?
Yeah, it's like a nice to have.
It's a nice to have, right? Yeah. But do I really need it? Maybe not, right? So we started talking to more and more consumers across various markets across Southeast Asia. And a kind of painkiller problem that came up over and over again was this concept of like, I just really want to buy real estate and I just want to buy my first home, but I just don't have enough income, or the banks will not finance me. And for a lot of people, this is a painkiller because there's a cultural kind of
attachment.
Yeah, exactly. To buying real estate, right?
Yeah.
Especially if you're a guy, right? For you, if you want to get married and you want to show your future partner, oh, I can actually provide for you or my family. You maybe in some countries, right? They feel like you almost have to buy a house, right? And a lot of people, especially in Vietnam or China or adjacent markets, they really prioritize owning this asset as probably the primary form of investment as well. And, a lot of people, because of escalating house prices, because of income instability, because of the nature of jobs, they just cannot afford it anymore, right? So we felt like this was a problem that was really worth solving. And so once we settled on this problem, we basically started talking to a lot of people in the market. We are also looking at, hey, what are some ways that we could solve them that people in the US or in Europe or more developed markets actually already have implemented? And so we started on, one of my friends ran this company called Divvy Homes, which at that time, they were growing really fast. They raised 3 or 4 rounds of funding in 2 or 3 years, and they became like $1 billion company like in 4 years, like very, very fast, right? And they were doing this model called rent to own, which was kind of very similar to what exactly the problem that we wanted to solve. So we were very inspired by that. And so when we came to Vietnam and started talking to more consumers, we were like, great, let's try this, right? And we kind of started from there. Yeah.
So the process was I think one of the ways you understood the market was by actually talking to the actual people, actual consumers who were feeling, as you said, the painkiller problem statement that you found, and then you decided to do this thing instead of like more of a push strategy of like, okay, I want to do this, and then I'll push it out to the market, whoever likes it, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think a lot of entrepreneurs, like if you start a business or even if you start a podcast, right?
Right.
Like you probably think that your podcast is the best podcast in the world, right? Because it's your baby, right? And
Right.
no entrepreneur or no media person wants to say that their baby is ugly, right? But when
Right.
you talk to real consumers, the consumers will tell you, yeah, your baby's kind of ugly. I don't want to talk to your baby, right? So then you actually get real feedback and you actually know, oh, this is actually the solution that I should do, and this is the good thing, this is the bad thing, and you pivot and you go from there. Yeah.
So you touched on the part of like from conceptualizing the idea to actually deciding to launch the business. But what about the stages of like, how did you assemble a team? How did you get the co-founders together, and how did you approach like the fundraising rounds, and how did you approach angel investors, venture capitalists? Can you talk more on that side, like the gradual stages of building Homebase? Yeah.
Our founding journey was so interesting, actually, and I don't really recommend it, actually. So I met my co-founders initially in Singapore. We were at this venture capital fund. We were in entrepreneur residences, so we all met there.
Yeah.
And initially, we actually had two co-founders. And when we started the business and we started building it, and after we kind of had validated the idea and decided that we wanted to build this type of business, we were raising our first round of capital. And at that point, for our business, like we're very like early stage, right? Because we were just like three guys with this idea, this pitch deck, and we were like, we're gonna go change the world, right? But we didn't really have too much like traction, like too much technology or anything built out, right? So we were just like pitching a bunch of venture capital investors or those kind of things. And we were actually, I guess, quite successful in, raising our first round of capital. At that point, maybe we already had filled half a round, and a lot of investors were interested because fundamentally they did believe that this was a very important problem to solve. We talked to a lot of consumers. We had a lot of demonstrated interest, and, people thought this would be a very big solution in the market, right, to be able to solve. So we were talking to a lot of venture capital investors, but halfway through our fundraising process, we talked to one VC, and this VC ended up doing due diligence. Like due diligence is the process where they like look into your team and look into your company and those kind of things. They were doing DD on our team, and they ran a background check on every single person, and they flagged one of the co-founders because his name came up on this like database, this like financial crimes database. And we were like, what? Like, that's crazy. There's no way it's this guy, right? There's no way. Because, this guy's very articulate. He's very smart. We had been working very well together for the past several weeks and past several months. But we were very surprised and we were very shocked. And initially, after we received the news, we confronted this guy and he was like, no, it's not me. It's not me. It's someone else. Those kind of things.
How was that conversation like, though?
It was shocking, right? Because, me and my other co-founder, we were just so surprised, right? Like, there's no way, right? Like, and so me and my co-founder, we ended up actually then digging more into this issue. And we ended up finding a specific resume that this other guy had with his previous experience, his photo. So we knew it was him. And we found that part of his experience was working at this bank in Singapore, and the press release of the financial crime where basically this guy had apparently worked at this bank and stolen money and been sentenced to prison and then been barred from serving on like the board of any financial company for the next 25 years. Like it matched perfectly. The bank name, the years, the name of the guy and everything. So we're like, no, it's got to be you, right? So at that point, basically, we had confronted him, and then we decided like it's very hard to continue working together, despite everything else, like because of this, right? And legally, it was not feasible to actually work together,
right?
But at that point, remember we actually had already raised half a round of funding, so we had to then inform all of the investors that, hey, actually, this third guy on our team, not good, right? Like, and he left and those kind of things. So actually a lot of the investors ended up pulling their money, right?
Oh, shoot.
And so we were basically back to square one. And the thing about, I think, startups and entrepreneurship and venture capital is that it's a very small world, especially in a community like Singapore or even in Vietnam, right? All the VCs and everyone knows each other. So at that point, it's just like, man, like you are like an early stage startup. You just have an idea, like, and you have a pitch deck and nothing else. And then no one wants to invest in you. And everyone has heard about this news. So we, at that point, just had to basically message people on LinkedIn, asking for like very small amounts of money and claw together this very small round. And ironically, the angel investor who found about this initial issue, he ended up actually investing in the company and actually following on later on. But then, we ended up basically, just messaging a lot of people, messaging people on LinkedIn, doing a lot of meetings, clawing together a very, very small round of funding, using that to actually prove out the initial business model. We then ended up, being very fortunate to be actually funded by Y Combinator, YC, as one of the first Vietnamese companies to be able to do so. Proved out the traction, and then raised a lot more funding later on, right? But I would say that initial stage is very, very difficult if that's the situation you're starting with, right? And I think if you're starting a business, right, like any business, you could be starting this coffee shop. You'd be starting you want to be a social media influencer, or whatever it is, right? The people that you work with is probably the single most important decision that you'll ever make, right? And there's a few podcasts I really like that talk about this, but one guy who I really like, his name is Naval. So he's a founder of this company called AngelList. He says that there has to be 3 criteria. You have to work with people who have high integrity, who are smart, right? And who have high energy, right? And if you are missing any one of those 3, it's game over, right? So you have to really, really find the people, and this is not only true of your co-founders, but your early team as well, or even your future manager, right? If you want to work for a big company, like it's true as well, right? You should find people who fit those 3 criteria, and and try to work with them, right? And I think especially if you're starting a business, the broader lesson is like it's just so important, right? Like people say that spend more time with your co-founder than like anyone else on your team, right? Like if you have a girlfriend or a wife or a husband, or like way more time, right? Like you'll probably see your co-founder more than you see your kids. So you better make sure that, and this is someone that you'll probably work with for the next 5 years or 10 years of your life, right? So you better make sure that in the beginning, like this is someone you really, really want to work with and really trust and really feel like this is someone that you can grow with and build this company with, right? So yeah, I think that's a lesson there.
So I want to ask about because I think what you said was your experience with your 3rd co-founder, right? The guy who, when did due diligence found out that he was doing some shady business.
Yeah.
Did that kind of harden your view on people, or did that like kind of raise your defensive mechanisms up more, or did you become more? Because I feel like this is my own personal experience, right? Which is that when you put a lot of trust in people, but then that trust erodes, then you start becoming very, very skeptical, but it leads to cascading problems later on. Like you don't trust anyone, and people around you don't feel like they trust, or you trust them anymore, so they don't feel empowered to do things anymore. So was there anything like that from your end of perspective?
That's a good question. I think maybe there was some of that, but I think another lesson that you learn very early in entrepreneurship is that like you can't really do everything by yourself. So even when that happens, like, and you're still trying to assemble a team, you still have investors who are really like supportive of you, right? Like you realize that you still have to rely so much on other people, and in that early stage, like you're just so small as a company, right? So a lot of it is just like other people who are so kind to you, right? Who offer to help proactively. Who, a lot of advisors who are just like hopping on calls with you, even if, they're running like very big businesses themselves. They have like 100 employees, yet they're willing to like take time at 11 p.m. at night and help you. And, they have kids, they have family, and those kind of things, right? So in those times, you also feel very, very grateful as well. But I think it's more around like, it teaches you that, like you can't really blame anyone else but yourself as well, right? Like, like we should have done more diligence in terms of finding the right people to work with and going from there as well, right? And like at the same time, when I look at kind of the outcome, right? Like my other co-founder, his name is JY. He's Singaporean. I also met him at the same kind of venture capital program that we did together, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's one of the most hardworking, like ethical, high integrity people I've ever met in my life. And like one of the crazy stories about him is, in his kind of previous experience, he used to sell. In Singapore, they have something called bak kut teh. I don't know. Do you guys know bak kut teh? Okay, it's like pork bone soup, basically. Right?
Oh, okay.
So imagine it's basically like he used to sell pho, right? Like imagine if you have a co-founder who used to sell like street food, right?
Yeah.
And imagine like how hard you have to work to be able to do that. And he ran a lot of different businesses. And one of the stories that really inspired me about him is in one of his previous businesses, like he was running out of money, right? And he needed to raise more capital, but maybe a lot of the venture capital investors didn't believe in him. So what he did is he went to this area in Singapore called Bukit Timah, right? Which is like this area where there's a lot of like high net worth people and the houses are very nice, just like all you RMIT people. No, just kidding. But like the houses are very nice and a lot of these people have a lot of money. And the way he raised capital for his fund is for his business is he just knocked door to door on these houses. And some of these people are like CEOs of like multi-billion-dollar businesses. And he ended up basically being able to raise capital that way. And even from that, he still had like mentors and some of our angel investors who ended up investing in our business, who he met through that method, right? So that's like the level of determination and grit and, like that. I find that like very inspiring, right? So I guess to your initial question, it's like, yes, in some regard, maybe you lose a little bit of confidence in people, but at the same time, like, if you work with really amazing people, they will never fail to surprise you. And I feel like you can always find these people who are on, all sides of the spectrum as well, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so you mentioned a very great point about working with people, and I just wanted to touch on, I think you said something that was amazing, and I want the audience to kind of remember and capture this, which is working with people with high integrity, who are smart and also who have a lot of high energy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that point was brilliant.
Yes.
Really. So, what did you feel was the most pivotal point in your business at Homebase? Like, what was the thing that happened that took it to the next level? Was it, Y Combinator, or was there another event?
Yeah. So, I will say that, like, I think there's no one pivotal point in terms of startup, because when you do a startup, it's so much up and down, right? Like, I think one, for example, one high point is obviously getting into YC. Another one is, when we did a release of one of the first product iterations that we did, we ended up, just getting thousands and thousands of customer inquiries, right? People who are interested in using this and those kind of things. And at that point, you're like, oh, wow, maybe you're building something that people want, because a lot of people reach out to you, right? And a lot of people want to solve this issue. So you're like, oh, wow, you're very energized by this kind of progress, right? But I think as a startup, or any type of new business or any new project, there's so many up and downs, right? Like another, for example, iteration is when COVID first happened, right? And you're a real estate business and we can't really operate fully online. Everything shut down. And at that point, it's just because everyone shut down, no one actually wants to buy real estate or buy homes or invest in new properties anymore. So it's then for us as a business, what do we do, right? And at that point, you also feel a little bit sad, and maybe that's also a low point, right? But I think part of what entrepreneurship teaches you is that there's so many ups and downs, right? From the founding journey, from things happening or whatever it is, right? That you become okay with volatility and you become okay with all of this ups and downs, and you just learn how to almost be more stoic and just just be okay with this volatility and navigate through the mess, and then everything will be okay, right, in the very end.
So speaking also on the topic of stoicism, it's kind of segues to my next question, which is, I think being an entrepreneur, especially in the initial stages, you meet a lot of, or at least from what I've heard, you meet a lot of skepticism and a lot of rejections from people.
Right.
And I think one of the most relevant entrepreneurship experiences is your peers and your families saying to you, oh, you should have stuck to that job. Why are you doing this? Why are you, taking out a $50,000 loan? Why are you, working 20 hours? Like, you should have kept that 9-to-5 job at Goldman Sachs or LinkedIn. Did you face any of those personal struggles, pressures, and how did you kind of stoically, walk through those dilemmas and struggles?
I think my mom today still is asking me, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing with your life, right? Like, why are you not in New York City working in finance, right? So no, I definitely face that, and I resonate with that a lot. And I think, especially in Asian culture, right? Maybe your parents want you to do something that's more traditional or more recognized and those kind of things. All of that is changing a little bit, right? And I think for me over time, in the beginning, I think it bothered me because it's like, why isn't my mom 100% supporting me, right? I feel like I'm doing something so special. Why are my parents not supporting me? But what I think I realized over time, as you talk to a lot of people from different generations, right? Older people, younger people, even your professors, right? Maybe your professors are entrepreneurship? Don't do that. That's so risky, right? But when you talk to people, you realize that everyone has different values, right? In life. And for some people, it's and maybe it's for my parents or, if you're an immigrant or, whatever it is, right? For some people, their values are more around stability, right? Or they want to, I guess maybe the mathematical way of putting it is they want to optimize the expected value of success of your kid, right? So what that means is, they want you to take something that's not so risky, right? But maybe very high pay, right? If you're a doctor or if you're a lawyer or if you're an engineer, right? You're not so volatile, right? But your pay is pretty good. So in the very end, maybe you have a good outcome, right? Because they want you to be stable, right? But I think over time, it's recognizing that other people, including your parents or your grandparents or your sister, or even one day when you have kids, right? Your kids will have different values than you, and it's recognizing what is important to you and what are you okay with, right? And I do think that these days, I think it's actually better for young people to take more risk because when you think about it, it's yes, if it's the 1900s or back when our ancestors were hunting in the woods, right? Hunting for their dinner, right? If you take a lot of risk and you meet a tiger and you're
you'll die.
I'm great. I can beat this tiger. Yeah, you're dead, right? That's or same thing with social isolation, right? When people have this philosophy of I'm going to go chart my own path, right? And then the tribe is just okay, they're all hunting together and you're charting your own path. You're dead, right? What are you doing, right? But these days, if you pursue a non-traditional path, right? If you want to become an influencer or if you want to do your own business, what's the worst thing that can happen, right? You still have a degree from RMIT or this university, and you can still apply for a job, right? Or, maybe you can always go back and just beg your mom for forgiveness. Oh, I'm sorry, I was so wrong. Take me back. I still love you. And, they'll still support you, right? Or even the contrary example is actually a lot of companies these days, they actually really value entrepreneurship experience, right? Because it shows that you are brave enough to go out and take a risk and do something at your own. And, and it shows that you have more managerial skills and responsibilities. And that's something that's very, very rare, right? Because I personally for me as well, if I'm hiring someone, I want to find someone who has started a business, even if it's a small business, selling coffee or selling stuff online or selling clothes online, because I think that shows that you're ambitious. You're very responsible. Maybe you even worked with other employees and stuff like that. So I think that's actually an added benefit, right? So I think in these days, I would actually encourage young people to actually go out and take more risks because the downside is very, very little, but the upside I think is very big. And it doesn't really matter, even if you don't think that you're going to do this in the long run, right? Even if you think you're going to go back to corporate and stuff like that, having that life experience, I think is just very fulfilling, but also, yeah, maybe, you'll be very successful and you don't have to, do this more traditional path.
So, I want to talk a little bit more about perhaps your current day-to-day at Homebase, but more specifically relating to people. So I I saw one of your company's promotional videos, and it mentions that your company currently has more than 70 personnel, right? Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And well, first of all, what do you feel is the value of working with so many different people from your perspective as the current COO of Homebase? And also, do you experience any struggles leading, let's say, a team of 70 different people with different needs, priorities, and let's say different perspectives on certain problems?
I think what I learned over the years is that managing people is actually the hardest part of any business. Because if you're building a product or if you're doing coding, software engineering, like your code doesn't have like concerns, or your code doesn't have like family events that suddenly they need to go and take a leave of absence or these kind of things, right? But people obviously can either make or break your business, right? There's a lot of potential issues that can come up. But also sometimes they can, really, really like scale your business in a way that, you don't even imagine, right? Because they bring so many diverse thoughts and abilities to your team that you can do so, right? I think for myself, honestly, like when I was younger, like, or when I first started the business, like, I feel like I was not necessarily the best manager because for me, I had a very high expectation of everyone, right? I was like, oh, I came from this investment banking background, and investment banking, it's always about like everything has to be perfect, right? Because you're delivering things to your client. So, if you're working in banking or consulting and even the font size is off or the color is the wrong shade or the alignment is off, right? It's actually really bad for the reputation of your firm as a whole, right? But in a startup, maybe that expectation sometimes is a little bit hard to enforce. But in the beginning, I also had that like really high expectation of people, and I was like, "Oh, this is not perfect. Like, we need to redo it, and it's not good, basically, right?" But I think over time, what you learn is that, not everyone has the same background or training or ability, right? And sometimes not everything will be perfect, and sometimes in a startup, you have to be okay with it, right? You just have to 80-20 it. Like, what is the 20% of the effort that will contribute to 80% of the results? And you have to be okay with some of the volatility, right? Because in a startup, sometimes moving fast. So Facebook's initial motto was move fast and break things, right? So sometimes moving fast is better than making everything so perfect, right? Because if you have time to make everything perfect, you're probably working at a very big company. It's very slow. There's so many layers of bureaucracy, those kind of things, right? But, when you're in a flat organization and those kind of things, like, yeah, things will fall through the cracks, right? And you have to be okay with it as well. So I think for me, I'm still learning how to like better manage people and those kind of things. But I think it is one of the hardest things about running any business or those kind of things, right? And I would definitely describe myself as someone who has like relatively high expectations with people, right? Even I sometimes like to brag to my friends that even the interns that we hire at Homebase are better than most of the people we've seen in the market. Because, either we have high expectations or, we really push them, but we also give them a lot of autonomy. We want people who come to work with us to almost be entrepreneurs, right? I don't want to give like, you have to do A, then you have to do B, then you have to do this, and then you have to do this, right? I want to be able to give people a rough framework of projects and let them figure it out for themselves, right? And, I really like working with people who are very proactive, right? Who are saying, oh, wow, like this is, I think, the obstacle that we'll encounter. And not only thinking about what the project is right now, but implications for the future as well, right? So yeah, definitely very important kind of topic to think about.
I'm very tempted to ask you this question that I think a lot of podcasts ask, which is, what's the best business advice that you've heard? But now I want you to like kind of flip it. What's the worst business advice that you've heard on your journey to building Homebase?
Well, I think maybe it's not necessarily advice from the outside, but I think one of the biggest lessons that we learned is also around people, where I think sometimes, when you're running a business, you have so many needs, right? And so you're very just like eager to fill open positions with people who you think are like, oh, like, okay, maybe this is good enough, right, for it. But I think, especially at the very early stage, if I had to kind of redo things again, I would really, really make sure that you hire A players, right? You hire the people who, in the long run, are going to be the best for the business for this position. And that you should not compromise at all on quality. Because even if it temporarily fulfills kind of this need, right? Eventually, after 6 months or after 1 year, you're like, oh man, like I really regret that decision, because it's hard to scale with the business. And there's a famous like venture capitalist basically that says, like, if you hire like a player, right? They'll also, because they also build a team, right? So they'll also hire a player, right? But if you hire someone who's like an A minus, they'll hire someone who's like a B, and then the B person will hire someone who's like a B minus and C. Then so your team gets worse and worse and worse and worse, right? So it's really important, especially in the very early stages, to not compromise at all on quality. And you hear of these like very legendary entrepreneurs like Elon Musk, or for example, the founders of Airbnb. They've interviewed themselves, like the first 3,000 employees of every single company, right? Like, you know, Elon Musk is really busy, right? But he interviewed that many people. And why? Because the reason is he just really wants to keep the quality and the culture of the company very high and very coherent, basically, right? So I think that's something that would really be important.
So I guess now I want to move on to more, let's say, personal questions, more of like anecdotes.
I'm scared.
Nah, no need to be, as it's more like relating to your startup entrepreneurship journey.
Sure.
So it's more like anecdotes about your rise to with Homebase. So did you ever personally feel like quitting when you were building this business? Because I know that I know from experiences from a lot of people that I know, when they're building businesses, they come across a lot of objections, rejections, a lot of no's, a lot of interpersonal conflicts, rejections from banks, from customers, clients, people, even their own employees, even their own co-founders.
Yeah.
And did it ever build up to the point where you were like so frustrated that you wanted to quit, or was your mentality like hard as a rock? And it's not you, it's not who Phillip An is. I have to be able to push through this. Like, how was that challenge of dealing with your own, dealing with all of these struggles like? And did you ever feel like I just want to throw in the towel?
I think in the beginning, it's very, very difficult to always have like a positive mindset, especially as we kind of described our own founding journey was quite challenging, right? I think definitely in the beginning, after all of that incident happened and before we were able to basically call together now another round of funding, it was very tempting to just say, oh, let's go back to the old company and like do something more traditional and something more safe. But for me at that point, I think I told my parents, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do entrepreneurship. I don't need the big company. And I'm not going to move back to the US. And I already told them that like maybe a few months before. So if I just like gave up and went back to the US, I'd be very embarrassed, right? And I'd be like, oh man, my mom, oh, you're right, and stuff like that. So I was more embarrassed by the way, so I was like, okay, I have to continue and persevere and do this, right?
Right.
But I think, entrepreneurship is like that, right? Like every other week or every other month, there's some catastrophe, right? One of your key employees wants to walk away, or maybe something on the external relationships, or a deal falls through, and you feel very sad and stuff like that, right? But I think it's this self-belief or this kind of conviction that this is the thing that you should be working on, that you're building enduring value, that you're providing a lot of value in the world, and I think that's actually what gets you through. But I think it is a very tough journey, right, for everyone, and it's something that is quite challenging.
Did entrepreneurship benefit your mental toughness in any way?
I would definitely think so. In many regards, right? Before, I think if I, let's say, stayed at a bigger company, you're not so concerned with like other people or other employees. You're like concerned about, what's my salary and how fast can I get promoted? And maybe as you start managing a team, it's like your immediate team, right? If you're the senior management of a company, or if you're starting a new project, you're suddenly concerned with many employees across the entire organization, right? And maybe some of these employees are a little bit older. Maybe they have families, they have kids themselves, right? And if you don't do well, then suddenly, you're putting your employees' like livelihoods and their kids at risk, right? So I think that definitely teaches you a little bit more perspective, right, on the significance of what you do, and how you need to take care of that broader team, not just yourself. Yeah.
So I feel that young people nowadays struggle a lot with motivation, right? So they struggle with finding the motivation to, at least in RMIT, do their assignments or go to school, attend lectures, or, motivation to go to the gym, motivation to better themselves, to self-improve, right? So what's your advice for students to be motivated every single day, or how to find that motivation within themselves to kind of achieve the goals or the objectives that they want at their, to achieve their own aspirations?
That's a tough question, right? But I think it's almost like this aphorism or this analogy that people say, right? Which is, if you measure a fish by its ability to climb the tree, it will always fail, right? And a lot of people use that to criticize like the modern education system, because, education is so focused on like test taking, right? It's always measured on academic success. But in the real world, it's so much more dynamic than that, right? And so I think people find motivation in different ways. So, maybe for you, your career path or your thing that you really like doing isn't doing, accounting statements, isn't doing DCFs all day, right? Maybe your motivation is creating content or just talking to random people on the street and asking them like, hey, what's your favorite food? Or like, or maybe it's fashion, or maybe it's something else that's non-traditional, right? And I think like a lot of people also say like, some kids, they feel like, oh, you're so lazy and stuff like that. But when they play video games or those kind of things, they're like so happy and so excited and so engaged, right? And they're like ranked very high and stuff like that, right? And I think it's just like finding like, what is it that really resonates with you? Because if you find that thing that you're really passionate about, I think you'll become motivated on it. But if you find something that you're like not that interested in it, like even for myself, right? If you put me in a very traditional company where I have to climb the bureaucracy, I don't think I'd be very motivated as well. I would just try to cruise every single day and, just try to, find something else or have a side hustle in the meantime. And maybe I really care a lot about the side hustle, but in the main job, it's like, yeah, maybe I'm not so motivated as well, right? So yeah, I think my advice is, obviously, it's important to balance. You shouldn't maybe just like, oh, my passion is playing video games, and I'm just going to play video games all day without any like plan or those kind of things, right? But ultimately, I think it's finding the things that like the Japanese have this concept of like ikigai, right?
Yeah.
Which is like, okay, there's those four things that like overlapping. You guys can display it on the podcast, but it's that, right? It's like finding like what you're good at, what you actually enjoy, but also what makes money and stuff like that, right? And I think if you find that intersection, like that's what will motivate you and make you want to do better. Yeah.
So essentially, don't force it, right? Try to find the right alignment between what it is you truly believe and what it is you're pursuing, and then the motivation would just come instead of trying to, I have to push this, I have to, try to keep a certain pace, and let's just walk through life and try to hold together our emotions and just try to get it done. Don't try to make a fish climb a tree. Try to let the fish swim in the ocean, because that's what it's motivated by, right? Something like that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think, of course, there are like, obvious like self-discipline habits, right?
Yes.
So, for example, like having like a to-do list, or like being productive in certain regards, or, like studying certain topics, right? Like those are like the basics, right? Those are the foundations, right? And I think a lot of those is around like self-discipline, accountability, those things like everyone has to do, regardless of what you are doing, right? You could want to be like, Kim Kardashian, right? But Kim Kardashian actually works very, very hard, actually, right? Because being a social media influencer it seems glamorous, but actually on the behind, there's so many logistics and those kind of things, right? And it's actually very smart how some people build their brand, right? So I think the base layer, the foundation that you have to get right is obviously the self-discipline, the goal setting, working with the right people, like all of those things, right? But beyond that, it's like, consider the big picture. Like, what is it that you're like overall working towards, right? And if that overall thing aligns with something that you feel and you believe is who you are, then I think that's actually where motivation arises.
So you're the COO and co-founder of a PropTech startup. Can you walk us through, and I'm pretty sure that the audience would be curious to know as well, can you walk us through what your day-to-day life is like? How do you, from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed at night, how does your day kind of play out as a COO and co-founder? Like you constantly calling up banks, or you calling up investors, dealing with people? How is that? Perhaps hour by hour? I'm pretty sure people would like to know. How is it like?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's hard because entrepreneurship means that fundamentally every single day is very, very different, right? So I think it's hard to prescribe like this is an exact schedule because it's not necessarily like a 9-to-5 job. For me personally, like there's various like personal routines that are important to me that I must do every single day. And there's obviously the work things, right? So for me, like even when I was young, I did like competitive swimming, and then throughout university, and then I ended up actually, playing a lot of sports and going to the gym a lot. So for me, like going to the gym every day is something that I must do, and I really try to do it in the morning, like when I wake up, right? Recently, especially, I've been trying to do more like meditation and having a more clear mind, and just doing a lot more like self-reflection, those kind of things. Not just about the business, but also about you as well, and like life and everything as well as, in terms of work, I mean, I would describe it as there's a few different categories of things that you do, right? There's like internal team meetings, right? Whether it be team meetings, one-on-ones, like syncs that you have with various people that you work with, or various teams, like maybe the marketing team or the HR team or those kind of things. There's external meetings where maybe with partners, with real estate agencies, with banks, whatnot, right? And then I would say there's like more like the deep work that you actually need to do, right? Apart from the meetings. So these are various tasks and assignments that you actually will spend time doing by yourself, or maybe with a small team, or even some like brainstorming sessions as well, right? And I think other than that, apart from that, like recently, especially, I've been trying to have a little bit more broad understanding about the world as well, like in various topics. And I find the best way to do so is just like reading, especially like longer form content. I think these days it's very easy to be distracted by things like Facebook or Instagram or like social media, where it's like very short, right? So I've been trying to read a lot more like books, right? So at any single time, maybe I have like 5 or 6 books that I'm reading at the same time. And it depends on various topics. So recently I've been a lot into, like almost like death, like it's a little bit morbid, but I've been reading a lot of books around, meaning, or like the search for meaning, or, at the very end of someone's life, like what truly matters, right? So that's like one theme. And a lot of it is also around like psychology, right? There's books like Persuasion. There's authors like Robert Cialdini that I really, really like as well. And then some things about more like history or psychology. There's a book I really like called The Black Swan by Nassim Taleb, who's a trader. He talks about risk and how people think about risk as well. So I try to get a more comprehensive view of the world and develop a better understanding of it as well.
So I guess my last question then is, perhaps this is a very interesting question that a lot of our audience would like to ask you, because a lot of our audience, so we're in FinTech Club, and one of our club's core values is innovation, right? And as a result, a lot of the people who view us and a lot of people who watch our content want to be entrepreneurs. They really want to start their own thing. They want to venture into this new field called it's not new, but it's a very high growing field called fintech and business technologies, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of people in RMIT and perhaps a lot of other university students as well. They would love to start their own businesses, or either they're already graduates or they're currently undergraduates who want to start a business when they graduate, or want to start a business while they're still in university. So what would be your advice to those ambitious and highly aspiring entrepreneurs, and I'm sure you'd be the best fit to give this advice because like you said before, you started your business at 24. So a lot of graduates are 24, 23, 24, kind of around that age. So what would be your advice to, as somebody who has gone through this path, what would be your advice to these ambitious students?
Well, I mean, like the short answer I think is like, obviously you should do it, but obviously I'm biased by my life experience. I mean, to put a little bit of nuance, I think it's, I think entrepreneurship is great. Maybe it's not for everyone, right? If your values are slightly different where, maybe you want some more experience before you work, that's okay, right? Or maybe you have a unique personal situation that necessitates you to depend more on a stable salary, then yeah, maybe doing a startup is not the best timing or idea, right? But I think assuming that that this is something you want to do, you have the ability and maybe privilege to be able to take more risks without a lot of like significant consequences, then I think it's great, right? And the perspective I tell my friends, even, like the Vietnamese friends who grew up here in Vietnam, is that I think it's very rare in history, in the society of the world, right? Where you have a country and a region like Southeast Asia and Vietnam that's growing so fast that is really eager and willing to like accept new technologies with new innovations and a really, really big market. Like it's 100 million people. It's not a very small country as well, right? And I feel like in terms of the history, the arc of the history, this is almost like the perfect time to start a business or do something in Vietnam. If you look at China, maybe that time was 10 or 15 years ago, because that's when it really, really grew, right? Now there's different types of opportunities here, but maybe it's more Chinese companies, right? Or in America, it was, obviously Silicon Valley maybe is an exception, but like in the 1950s and 1960s, that's when America really, really grew very fast, right? And now, a lot of people are looking to Southeast Asia and Vietnam as an opportunity. And for you guys as young people, you guys maybe don't have too many like family responsibilities. You guys are able to navigate very well in the Vietnamese environment because you can speak the language, the culture here, yet, your English is very, very good. You guys have a lot of opportunities to interact with foreigners who run big companies or are overseas consulting firms. So you have this kind of dual culture and you have this right spirit of entrepreneurship. You guys are very eager and excited to learn as well, right? So I think, if you have this privilege of doing so, like, why not just do it, right? Take advantage of it, right? And I think it's something that even if you fail, as I mentioned, right, it will still provide you with a lot of learning opportunities and a lot of advantages, right, over any traditional candidate, even if you want to work for a big company over time as well. So I would definitely encourage people to do it and just see how it goes. Yeah.
It's in your nature, right? Being an entrepreneur, you want to start your own thing, and perhaps you want to pass along that advice to other people. It's just to take on a lot of, calculated risks at a young age because you still don't have as much responsibilities as when you're older. So why not take this opportunity and just do this once in a lifetime opportunity? Just seize this once in a lifetime opportunity.
Very well said. Yeah.
So, I'm Phillip An. It has been an amazing podcast episode. You've provided a lot of insightful perspectives on like the entrepreneurship side of things, as well as your personal side of things. You provided a lot of stories about, the story before, like career before Homebase and your career building Homebase. And I'm sure that you've provided a lot of value, and I hope that the audience has received a lot of value. So with that, I thank you so much for coming on to today's podcast. I'm Phillip An. And do you have any final thoughts or concluding thoughts?
No, thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed this episode. Yeah.
All right, so thank you very much, everyone, for watching the second episode of FinTechTainment. We'll catch you in the next one.